Okay, here we go. That should be working. If you are out there in the stream, which I don't know how many people are here, send me a comment that one, the audio levels are good, and two, the audio levels are not good. So let me see. I don't even know if anyone's here. It doesn't matter. We're going to go for it. Let me make sure I know what I'm doing here. Yeah, I haven't done a stream in a long time. I was really busy summer, but we're we're under the gun here. It's all based on a conversation I had with my niece, actually, and she she bought a new car. I'll show you a picture of her car. Now, let me just do a little intro. So tonight we're going to talk about mixtapes, and you can see in this image here. This is the mixtape that I found. Actually, this is a mixtape called Assorted Mess 3. And I'll just bring it up here on the camera. So here's Assorted Mess 3. All right, now this is the tape that I made in probably 1980, I'd say 1985, 1986. I had four of these. I had 1 through 4. And they had different music on them. This particular one, I didn't remember what was on this, but it was returned to me on my 50th birthday about 8 years ago by a friend of mine. That was my friend of mine from high school, and he was also my college roommate. So, yeah, he returned this, and I completely forgot about it until this whole thing came up with this having mixtapes. But I went and pulled this out, and I put it in my Nakamichi tape deck. And that tape deck was able to play it, and it turns out that this one has a bunch of new wave stuff on it. So it has U2, The Police, OMD. We got some people on here. That's ABC, Thomas Dolby, The Cars, English Beat, Ultravox, Wang Chung, Talk Talk, and more English Beat on it. So that's what's on this guy here. That tape deck you saw there. What tape decks are mostly belt driven, and it keeps the tape mechanism isolated from motor vibration. Turntables are kind of the same way. But that belt kind of deteriorates over years. And this particular tape deck was a friend of mine. It was his dad's, and when he passed away, my friend of mine from my town in Colorado gave me this Nakamichi tape deck, and it's really nice one. But these tapes that you see, when that belt gets loose inside a tape deck, a lot of times you can't fast forward and rewind. And if these cassette tapes are sitting flat for a long time, the tape on the reels internally kind of settles down in the tape, and it won't fast forward. It'll play, but it won't fast forward and rewind. So in the olden days, when we used to have these things, we'd take a number 2 Ticonderoga pencil and stick it in the center here. I have those pencils here, but it didn't work out very well. It doesn't fit exactly, but what does fit is my property of Atomic Energy Commission. This is a lab pen from the Los Alamos National Lab. This was back when the Department of Energy was called AEC, or I don't even know what AEC stands for, Atomic Energy Commission. These work better and if you want to rewind it, you put let's say I want to fast forward. No, let's say I want to rewind this tape on side A. So you stick your pencil in here. Now a lot of people know this trick, but you stick it in like this, and you make sure you're spinning it the right way, and then you spin it up like this. Okay, now I'm rewinding this tape. So in order for me to fast forward this tape, to find out what songs are on it, I sat there and spun this tape. I just started laughing one night, and was rewinding this tape. But anyway, tonight we're going to talk about mixtapes and how they are not the same as or playlists on like Spotify or uh, iTunes or YouTube Music, how they're not the same as a mixtape. And I know a lot of you out there are going to say, okay, boomer, you have no idea what you're doing. You don't understand Spotify. That might be true, but I'm going to go ahead and show you some justification on why I maintain and stand by my statement. So, the idea of this mixtape tech talk came about from my niece. My niece ended up buying. She graduated from college, and she ended up buying a brand new Mazda CX-3, and this is her car here. And she sent that out, and I'm on like a group chat with my brothers and sisters and their children. So my niece is on here and some other people. And so I asked her. I said, "Wow, how'd you break in your new car? Did you drive around with the windows down playing your favorite song, or did you break a bottle of champagne on the bumper, or what'd you end up doing?" She goes, "No, I actually played a song and I drove around to kind of celebrate my new car." Thank Full Wave Wrecked. I'm going to really try to pay attention to all the chats this time. Now it just works out. My voice is failing now. Okay, anyway, so I told her that whenever I start a road trip, I always start road trips with one song, always. And it is Jessica by the Allman Brothers Band. And why did I pick Jessica? Because Jessica, in the movie Field of Dreams, when Kevin Costner's character goes and gets the writer, who's James Earl Jones, in Boston, they're gonna drive back out to Iowa. They play Jessica as the theme song to show that they're on this road trip from Boston over to Iowa. And so there's going to be a lot of things that are really kind of silly about this whole thing, but Jessica is what I start with. And then I started thinking about all the other songs that I play when I want to really turn up the stereo loud and roll the windows down and just have fun driving. I hope that the youth of the world gets to enjoy this as much as I did, or people in my generation got to do that. So, when I was young, let me see. I think when I was about almost 14, I had a newspaper route, and but I got interested in listening to music, and the very first piece of stereo equipment that I bought was this thing here, and this thing is a Pioneer KP4000. I bought this at my sister was going to college down at UNM, and her roommate worked at Kurt's Camera Corral on Central Avenue, which I believe is still there. And he had an employee discount, so she was able to get me an employee discount. And what I ended up buying was the let me put my mug up here. What I ended up buying was this Pioneer, because it's the only one I could afford. It had $150, and so I bought this in 1977 for $135. And this is 2 years before I even drive in a car. Why did I do that? That's a pretty valid point. Well, my mom had a 1970-ish orange Ford Torino four-door. This was her car, and I decided I'm going to put a car stereo in here because this was like a family car. When we moved to Los Alamos, we ended up buying this Ford, and it only had an AM radio. So I put this the KP4000 Pioneer tape deck in where the AM radio was. So Okay, let's go back over here to here. Yeah, so for speakers, I ended up using a speaker called a dual cone. It's a kind of speaker like this. It's a 5 1/4 inch speaker with a paper. It was a paper speaker, and a dual cone speaker had like a little thing in the center here, where it would reproduce the high frequency, so you would get a full range speaker out of this. This was before there were speakers with woofers and tweeters embedded, or the Jensen thing called a triax, and which was a 6x9 speaker with a mid-range and a tweeter kind of mounted in the center of the speaker. But this was before that. Plus, I couldn't afford those speakers. I actually had a pair of these 5 1/4s, and it works out that the 5 1/4 was actually the cutout size in the rear deck of the Torino there, so we got them mounted in there. And so we I think we used like a what do they call it, zip cord, which is like an extension cord, speaker wiring, and we ran it under the carpet and that kind of stuff, and got it all wired up and soldered and everything. And our first playing was my friend Alistair came over, and he brought over a tape that he had recorded on his brother's stereo, cassette tape. And we listened to the very first song we played in the car stereo was Won't Get Fooled Again. Let me see if I can put up just a few seconds of Won't Get Fooled Again here, so that we don't get a copyright strike. But here we go. No, that's not it. Here we go. Okay, so you kind of know what that song is. Here's 2:14. It's kind of, I'm laughing because it just kind of reminded me of this whole evening. I mean, it's just like burned into my memory. So we're sitting in this car with the windows up, and this was in the summer, and we put on Won't Get Fooled Again by The Who, and it was amazing. Because all we ever had in our cars were AM radios, and we had stereo, and there was stereo separation. It was loud. It was just awesome. Now, how many watts did that little Pioneer put out? 4 watts. 4 watts. Now, car stereos now have 1,200 watts and that kind of thing, but 4 screaming watts of power. But it was awesome. All right, so back in those days, we had AM radio, which AM radio only played pop music, and then you had FM or FM radio, which had higher quality, and there's a lot of classical stuff, and this thing called AOR, which is album-oriented rock music on FM. And if you lived in a town that had a good DJ, like an actual person that went into and played a show, typically a DJ will be on the air for 2 to 4 hours, and they get to choose the music that they're going to play based on the program manager's kind of notion of what was supposed to be on that particular radio station. We are fortunate in Los Alamos. We had a station called KRST there in Los Alamos. It came up from Albuquerque at 92.3. And they had disc jockeys there, and they were actually really good. KRST in the early 70s it was a really good radio station for FM. Now what's happened, that station eventually, towards the late 70s, changed format over to country, and we ended up losing that. Now, over the years, what's happened is telecommunication bill, I think in 1986, opened the market for corporate companies to come in and start purchasing radio stations all over the country. And one of the biggest ones now is called Clear Channel. And so, chances are, if you're in a town of any size, you have a clear channel station. So if you want to listen to classic rock, it's probably the exact same classic rock in here in Colorado as it is in New Mexico and Texas and California and Georgia. It's probably all the same. It's just like homogenized, only play the hits of the artists and that type of thing. So the notion of a disc jockey is really quite unique now, particularly if you want to listen over the airwaves. All right, so you couldn't get for us at that point, you couldn't get new music recommendations from listening to the radio. But one of the groups I hung around with in high school, we used to call ourselves the Spuds. They would get somebody they knew were living in Los Angeles, and they would get those guys to record KRQ in Los Angeles, which was the kind of like the new wave punk station there in Los Angeles, and they would mail us out cassette tapes, mail somebody in my group cassette tapes, and they would hear all these new artists. Now back in those days, which is like probably 1970 or late 70s, 77, 78, 79, an album, a typical album like the LP, was probably about $9 or $10. And the minimum wage back then was $2.20. So if you wanted to buy an album, you had to work, let's say you work 6 hours and then you get a cheeseburger on the way home. You barely have enough to buy an album. So the fact that you had an album resulted from you working a long time to get that. Because of that, you ended up listening to the whole album. Now, when you bought an album back then, you bought it because there was a hit song on it. But you listened to the whole thing because you bought it, for one, and you wanted to see what other songs were on there. And, a friend of mine, Kevin, I talked to him about this live stream, and he told me, well, you get the 1 or 2 hit songs off of there. Then you get the songs that are filler songs, which are, you refer to them as horrible ones. And then you get these gems along the way that you don't expect, that you would never hear on the radio. And so you get the album for a price. You get what comes with an album. I'll show you a few albums that I have here. I picked them up off of my stack here. What would you get when you bought an album? If you buy something online now and you like hook it in your iStream catalog or whatever, or iTunes catalog, you're missing out on a physical entity that you can hold in your hand. So I'm going to show you some albums that I picked off of my stack that were kind of representative of albums back then. So this is Machine Head. This is from Deep Purple. And this is this one folds out like this. All right, so what you have here is a bunch of photographs of the band. Looks like they're recording, or mugshots of not really mugshots, but photos, portrait photos of the band members, tell who they are. Song list, the length of the songs, what the record label was, who the engineer was, where it was recorded, that type of thing. So you get all this artwork. Now, why is this important now? Why is this important now? I know that a lot of guitarists, particularly because I watch a lot of guitar videos on YouTube, they want to recreate the sounds of the classic guitarists with their gear that they have now. And so what this kind of thing does now, what this kind of thing is this is like a pictorial archive of what the equipment they used when they were recording an album. So I've watched plenty of videos where people will look at this and say, oh, that's a Marshall, Plexi 1968 version, or that's a Marshall cabinet with vintage blue speakers in it and that kind of thing. So these things are invaluable for basically historical purposes, but also you get a feel for what the album is. Now this particular album sleeve comes with some extra things. So they just call this the sleeve. And typically record companies will do some advertising on here, advertise other records that they have in their catalog. Okay, so these ones look like they're all mix CDs, basically. But the last one down here is Looney Tunes. Okay. Sometimes you also get an add-in. Now this is a fold-out that you can put on your wall. Okay. And this is basically all the lyrics from the Machine Head songs. And you get these and you put them on your wall, and that's kind of cool. Right. And as a fan of Deep Purple, you'd like to have this on your wall. I mean, that's kind of cool. So you'd get that for your $9 or $10. I'm going to show you some other ones that were good. I kind of went through about 20 albums looking for ones that had interesting extras beyond just the record. So I know you're not going to believe this, but I do have the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. This came out, I think, in 1978. And inside of here is pictures from the movie. So if you were a disco dancer back then, I'm sure you you watched Saturday Night Fever a lot, and you probably know what scene these actual stills from the movie are. And these sleeves are actually a little bit different. They're not advertisements for the record company, but they are actually very specific information about each of the tracks. Because Saturday Night Fever is a soundtrack, and so like "Staying Alive," performed by the Bee Gees. Barry Gibb was on guitar and vocals. Robin Gibb was on vocals. Bass guitar was Maurice, who played the drums, the keyboards, and additional guitars and other percussions. And this was recorded in France, and the overdubs were done in Florida with the engineer and the assistant engineer. So this one has a lot of information on it as well. This is actually kind of unique that they went down and they documented who worked on what song. That's for every song on this record. So, yeah, the Fifth of Beethoven. That was a disco favorite, done by Walter Murphy. All right, so that was Saturday Night Fever. And this other thing, continued on in the 80s. Now here is Joshua Tree by U2. And this one has a big fold out in the center of the band, probably out in Joshua Tree in California. So let me see what's inside of this one. This one just has a black sleeve. I think there's something else in here. Yeah, here it is. Okay, this one has all the original lyrics as a fold out as well. Okay. And it has a different album photo in here. So you get this and put this on your wall. Okay, and then you have all the lyrics here. So as as artists became more and more famous, and by the time that U2 came out with this, I mean, this was I think this is their fourth or fifth album, because there was Boy, October, Pride. I think this is number 4. Anyway, so the artist could kind of dictate what was on the was on the album cover. So I just mentioned about the album itself. You have the hit that you buy it for. That's the one that gets airplay if you're listening to the radio. And then you have, you might have another one. And then you have some called like sleeper songs, or the deep cuts that they call them now, the deep cuts that are not those hits. And then, but some albums come out that every song was a blockbuster killer song. It was pretty rare. Oh, hey Alfred. It was pretty rare that that albums were, beginning groove to groove, awesome songs. One of them that came out in the 70s was this one here. This is Boston's first album. This was recorded in Tom Scholz's basement, all by him. All the parts, everything was done by him. I think he got Brad Delp to record the vocals, but everything else is one guy, and he did it in his basement. And if you watch, there's YouTube videos where they actually go and they kind of tour the basement. Now, if you like music, like, I love music, so that basement should be designated as a National Historic Site. Because this album, if you grew up in the 70s or anywhere near after this came out, I think this came out in 1976, this was on everyone's car stereo. Everyone's stereo at every party. This album this is killer. Now, one of the things that Tom Scholz did, I think this might be some rumor, but apparently there's a rumor that he took the songs and compressed the dynamics of that, which allowed DJs to kick up the volume just a hair when they played this album and not be worried about distortion or, going into distortion because it got too loud. And because of that, when a Boston album would come on the radio, it was about 1 or 2 or 3, maybe a 3 dB louder than all the other songs. And when a Boston song came on, you knew it was a Boston song because it was intense, rocking and that kind of thing. If you're looking for an album of the 70s, look for this one. Now this one actually was this is number 2 on the most albums sold for the premiere. Was it the premiere? The first album of an artist. This one's at number 2, and I think over its time, I think it's at least sold at least 20 million copies of this one. The number 1 album, the premiere album or the debut album of an artist, is Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. And that's just edged out that Boston album. Okay, so if you're looking for a good album, get that Boston one. All right, so what's next here? Let me go over here. Oh, okay. All right, so I think at some point we bought a new Chevy pickup truck in the 70s when our family was driving this. Oops, let me get over the right window. Yeah, when we had the Ford Torino, that car stereo was permanently mounted in the Ford Torino. But when we got the truck, I'd like to move my prized now first piece of stereo equipment, which was that cassette player, from the car to the truck, and you could get these things called slide mounts, and that's what this thing is here. So you'd mount one of those plates, that bottom plate would mount on the car stereo, and then you'd get 2 different top plates and mount those in your car. So I had 2 top plates and 1 bottom plate, and I could take that Pioneer stereo and slide it out of the Ford and shove it into the Chevy. The Chevy was even more, they called them plain Jane trucks back then. It had nothing. I mean, there was no air conditioning, it didn't even have a radio. Power windows are kind of, only for Cadillacs back then, but, crank windows. There was nothing special about this truck, but it did have a car stereo, and the whole spacings in the doors were 6x9s. All right, we'll eventually get get going here. So let me just crank up some speed on these guys here. All right, so my parents had one of these. This was a Realistic, which basically was Radio Shack brand. We had a cassette recorder, and we had a Gerard turntable that we could play albums on and record on this this tape deck. This wasn't the actual one we had, but it kind of looked like this. But this isn't the actual one, because I don't think the one that we had Dolby on it or would record on Chrome tapes. I couldn't find the exact one, but it was probably earlier than this, because it wasn't very good. It was better than just using a one of those portable cassette players, which were mono. This one was actually stereo. So one of the very first things I bought was this thing here. This was like the second piece of gear I had. This is a Technics cassette deck M33. Now this is actually this is my cassette tape I bought probably in 1979. And by then I had a different job that made a little bit more money than the paper route. But this is a real tape deck. And I bought this because I wanted to make tapes for the car stereos. All right. Now, when I was talking to my friend Kevin about these mixtapes, we were kind of joking about a lot of stuff, and he said, well, when cassettes came out, there was like the Cat's Meow. It was really easy to do cassettes, because before we used to record on cassettes, he was recording on 8-tracks. So his parents had one of these consoles that had a big. It was giant. It was probably 6 feet wide, and speakers in the back, and it looked like it came out of a church. We have here. Okay. Oh, we're getting some comments in. What year did you buy your car? What year did your car stereo cost more than the rest of your car? Well, that's probably my first car when I was in high school. It was given to me only because if I didn't rebuild the engine, my dad was going to take it to the junkyard. So that thing had really no value, and that car stereo I put in there actually was pretty good. I spent a lot of money on that. Okay. Yeah, Alfred says, I may have seen that at a few parties. Yeah, we'll get into that one in here in a minute. But Kevin was telling me about recording on 8-tracks. Now, an 8-track, if you don't know, I don't even have one in here. It actually has 8 tracks, but since we're in stereo, it really only has 4 tracks for right and left. And you could get a certain amount of time on there. Like, so you'd have an 8-track you'd buy a 45-minute 8-track. Well, let's call it, let's make it easy, 40-minute 8-track. You'd have 10 minutes per track, and then it would automatically switch from track to track. So what Kevin would do is go and plan out his mixtapes that he'd put on 8-tracks such that the time allotted would fit exactly into a track. And then, so he would basically put the needle down and slam the 8-track in, start recording, and he'll get it so that it fills up that track. And then he would move on to the next track. Because when you had 8-tracks back then, pre-recorded ones, there was always a track change in a couple of the songs, which was irritating, because you'd be listening along and you'd be, enjoying the music, and then it would fade out, and you'd hear this click, click, and then it would fade back in. And so you get used to that if you only listen to 8-tracks. Now, he told me something that was even sicker than that. He said that he would plan it out such that he needed his track length to be, let's say he got a 48-minute? Yeah, let's say he had a 48-minute 8-track. So it was 12 minutes per track. And he planned his things out, but he needed shorter tracks. So he'd pull the tape out of an 8-track and cut it and splice that together to make the 8-track effectively shorter. And then he could get all of his songs to fit within the tracks. Well, he's explaining this to me, and I'm like, oh, you are a nut. He's like, well, this is what we used to do. And he said, you know why? And I'm like, because that last track, you don't want to have that blank part at the end of the last track. Because if you switch back to the first track, you're now back to the end of the first track. Yeah. So anyway, he was cutting 8 tracks before it was even popular. That's how committed he was to music. Okay, so there was another thing that was going on in the 70s to get you to buy more albums, and it was called Columbia House. And so you would get Columbia House flyers that would say, you can get 7 albums for a penny, but you had to sign up to buy like 5 more at the regular price. And they would come in the mail. And so you'd get the 7 first, and then you were committed for 5 or 6 months of an album every month. But it was only from one record label. So if you're in Columbia House, you could only buy from Columbia House artists. And that was a way that a lot of people got records as well. But so Stephen Jett writes in, he remembers when the old KRST would play their albums in entirety. Oh, no, that's a great comment. So KRST, that radio station I was talking about before, would play an entire album, and so you could just hit record over the air. I didn't even know that little aspect of it. That probably the nighttime guys did that. So anyway, so the albums were so expensive. The group that I mentioned before, the Spuds, would do this. They would do coordinated buying, so that they would make sure that they didn't have any duplicates amongst all these friends. And back then, if we wanted to buy something off of that KROQ tape, they'd have to drive down to Albuquerque to, I don't know, Wax and Tracks or someplace in Albuquerque, which is a 2-hour drive. And they would make album buying runs. So they would get in the car and they'd go down and buy 1 or 2 albums while they're down in Albuquerque. And then they would come back. They'd take the albums and they would have this thing. I don't know if they called it back then, but it's like the Virgin play of the album, where we would have these recording parties, where we would all bring our tape decks down and chain them all together to someone's amplifier, and then we would all get set up, get our tape and record on pause, and then he'd lay the needle down on the groove, and we'd all hit record, and then we would all record the very first playing of the album. Because of that, what ended up happening, we didn't know this at the time, but it turns out that friendship that evolved from these coordinated buying, listening to the same type of music in high school, having parties together, the bonds that were formed are really quite tight. And I can tell you that we communicate with a Spud group chat every day. All of us. And there's about 10 people, maybe 11 people, 10 or 11 people that are on this constant communication all day long. I tell people, I'm in constant conversation with my friends from high school, and they really can't believe it. They're like, oh, no, Facebook? And I'm like, no, we still just do it over the phone. And it's really quite unique, the friendships that were formed because of the music we used to listen to. All right, Kevin also said the albums themselves, this is where we're going to get into mixtapes. The albums themselves, he referred to it as linear listening. So you'd put your needle down and you'd listen to the entire album side. And then you'd get up and flip it over and listen to the other side. And you listen to a lot of albums that way. You're listening to the whole entire album because they were so expensive. You wanted to get the most out of the album that you purchased. You didn't just buy it for the one song, because you could have bought the 45 or the single release, but you wanted to listen to the whole album. And because of that, you end up, those other tracks that are not the hits, you end up developing he called it an acquired taste for every song on the album. Now here's an example of that. I'm going to give you 3 artists and I'm going to let you guess what are my favorite songs from the three artists. All right, the first one is Pink Floyd. I'll run through some Pink Floyd songs. You got Comfortably Numb, Wish You Were Here, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, Money, Have a Cigar. There's none of those. None of them. It turns out my favorite Pink Floyd song is Mother. And Mother was the first track on side 2 of the Wall album. And it is a song about how Roger Waters and his mother, the relationship built this wall around Roger. That's Mother. If you want to listen to an awesome cover of Mother, Pearl Jam does a cover of it on a late night show with Fallon. Fallon's late night show, they're on playing a cover of Mother. So that's my favorite Pink Floyd song. I never get tired of listening to Mother. All right, Jethro Tull. Is it, Aqualung? Wind Cries Mary? No, that's a Hendrix song. Anyway, Locomotive Breath, Skating Away, Teacher. No, none of those either. My favorite Jethro Tull song is Wondering Aloud. And that is on Aqualung. And it is a really quite unique, kind of like, I don't even know what the musical terms would be, but it's definitely not a normal type song with verses and that type of thing. And then we come over to Led Zeppelin, which is the band I listen to probably most in my life. I could just name off all the songs. Good Times, Bad Times, Communication Breakdown, Whole Lot of Love, Ramble On. I don't know, whatever. You can keep going. Rock and Roll, Black Dog, Stairway to Heaven, Kashmir. It just goes on and on. For the longest time, it was The Ocean off of House of the Holy. But now, it's the last song on Led Zeppelin 2, which is called Bring It On Home. I love that song. It's just, I think once I heard Bring It On Home, I was set for life to be a Led Zeppelin fan. Okay, so let's rewind back to not Leanna's car, my niece's car that she bought. Now, when I'm that night that she mentioned that she bought a new car, and I came up with Jessica, and then the next song I came up with was Panama by Van Halen, and then I just kept rattling off all these great fast songs, and my nephew started taking those recommendations and putting them on a Spotify playlist. And I think after that evening, I think I had probably 15 songs on this playlist, which are the really hard, fast-paced songs that play great when you've got a car stereo and you're playing it loud. And a lot of those songs are the same ones I used to listen to when I'd go skiing. So if you want to crash, ski really fast, just put on Panama and start skiing. And almost any AC/DC song, doesn't matter what the AC/DC song is, you're going to go faster than you really expected. All right, so I did that, and then I started creating this playlist. But my niece started creating her playlist. And she said, "Hey, Uncle Craig, thank you for creating these songs." And many, my nieces and nephews, a lot of them, they had never heard any of these songs. And I'm like, "Really?" And he goes, "No. Well, they're in a new generation. These songs are from the 70s, mostly. A lot of 80s songs there. But this is songs from 30 or 40 years ago. I don't expect them to know what these songs are unless their parents play these songs. But, we don't know what kind of music they listen to. But she has a playlist now. And she said, "Why don't you listen to this? Because this is what I'm listening to now." So I took that, and I walk the dog every night. I go on a dog walk, and I put on something to listen to on my headphones. And I started listening to my niece's playlist. And I got to only listen because I'm walking at night and I'm listening to the music. And I noticed that the first few songs of hers, I was comparing them to artists that I know. And I was like, this sounds like Fleetwood Mac. This sounds like Ravi Shankar. This sounds like the Beatles with In Without You. And I realized I can't do that. That's really actually a bad thing to compare those things, because these are new artists. They've created their own music, and it's an art form all to itself. So I can't try to make the association of my niece's music to the music that I grew up with. I need to enjoy it for what it is. And that's once I did that, I could actually enjoy what it was. There are some songs in there that were really good. There were some other ones that I didn't particularly like. Anything with auto-tune, I just like, skip it. I'm going to go to the next one. I don't know why that seems to be an attractive effect on a voice, but I can't handle that. Let me see where I am on here. I got to do the same kind of thing when I went on a road trip with my niece, who's 13, and she had a playlist that she had on her phone. And when we're both driving and we're both, awake, well, I'm always driving, but when she was awake, we only listened to her music. And I told her it's fine, we'll put on whatever. And it was interesting. She's 13 years old. I can't remember. I think when I was probably 13, I don't know, I was probably listening to, I have no idea what I was listening to. Elton John, AM radio, that kind of thing. All those, like The Streak, and all those AM radio songs. I don't know why I remember The Streak, but whatever. Maybe John Denver. Whatever the songs were in the early 70s is what I was listening to on AM radio. Now, she was playing, and her music had actually a lot from an artist called Machine Gun Kelly. And here's the Machine Gun Kelly album. This is actually from his, Daybreak song. And Machine Gun Kelly, I guess, is a guitarist, and it was featuring this singer named Corpse. And this is like, I don't even want to compare it to anything, because I don't know if I could compare it with anything. Let's just say that of all the songs back on her playlist, I actually could listen to Machine Gun Kelly with this vocalist named Corpse. It was actually something I don't even want to say tolerate, but I actually kind of liked that stuff. There are other songs on there that were just like, this is not even musical. This is crap. You're going to have to fast forward it if you would. And she was okay with that. But did get to listen to it, and I got to listen to what she's listening to now as she's a 13-year-old. All right, so let's talk about mixtapes in general. So when you're making a mixtape, and there's a movie that clearly explains the nuance of a mixtape. There's some reason why you want to create a mixtape. A lot of times you're going to give it to a friend. You want to play songs that you like only on that tape. You give it to your girlfriend. Or I made mixtapes for my now wife. I make those tapes that kind of fit into some kind of scenario. Kevin and all the Spud guys, they were all skaters in high school, so they always seemed to have a half pipe ramp. And so they would put on all these high intensity punk songs on their mixtapes. And they had that one for road trips. They had something. They used mixtapes for that. And so there was always some type of theme. And you end up choosing the songs, and you also end up choosing the segues between the songs to be somewhat consistent, as well as the volume levels of the transition. When you're making a mixtape, I don't think any of us had two turntables, so we couldn't cross blend like you can now with a MP3 player. But you want those to kind of butt up against each other. And you had a limited amount of time. So if you're going to do a 90-minute tape, which is like what I end up using, where'd my tape go? Yeah, this is XL2. So when I was buying tapes, I'd get these Max XL2s. It's a chrome tape, or I'd get TTK SA90s. So you got 45 minutes on one side. That's actually they actually get 45 minutes. So you'd pick the amount of songs to actually maximize that. But you were limited by 45 minutes per side. And so you clearly wanted to fill that with songs that would meet the criteria of the event that you want, or your activity that you're wanting to use this music for. And what that did was, because you listened to all the album tracks, you got to know the hit ones, you got to know the songs that you didn't like, and you got to know those acquired taste songs, like when I just mentioned my favorite songs. So the person creating the mixtape was their knowledge of music was kind of critical to make a really good mixtape. So there's a movie called High Fidelity with John Cusack and Jack Black, and there's a link down in the show notes too. There's a segment where the Cusack character Rob talks about making mixtapes, and it's clear that Cusack understands exactly what I'm talking about, because mixtapes have a very specific purpose. And if there's in the show notes, there's a link down to that. And when I watched that movie, which I've seen many, many times, he hits it right on the head. All right, so when recordable CDs came out, probably, I don't know, 1996 maybe-ish, you could make mixed CDs, but you were still limited. You had more, basically, real estate on a CD because you could play. No, actually, you had less. Recordable audio CDs you could put about 82 minutes on a recordable audio CD. The MP3s weren't even in the picture yet, but you could do mixed CDs at the same time. You could, as the same knowledge of your music would go into a mixed CD. It's just different medium. Now, I actually found this thing. This is my portable audio CD player, and I bought this one specifically for skiing because it had enough buffer memory that it could bring in a lot of the song as an audio track into memory, so that when I'm shaking around, it doesn't jiggle the musical playback. This one had 25 seconds, which is really quite long. And oddly enough, this one still works. I couldn't believe it. I plugged this thing in. I bought this thing in like 1997, so I can't even do the math. What is that, 24 years ago? This thing still works. And my pocket on my ski coat was big enough to do this thing, so I'd take this and shove it down in there. I'd get on the track that I wanted to listen to, put it down in there, and then I'd hit the slopes. Now, what changed over the time? Turns out that there's a PhD candidate in Germany. His name was Karl-Heinz Brandenburg, and he started working on the MP3 format, what would become the MP3 format in 1982. That was right about the same time that CDs came out. I remember buying my first CD player in 1984. Yeah, 1984, I bought my first CD player. So he was working on the MP3, the streamable format, I could call it streamable format, in 1982. But it took like 10 years for it to kind of get finalized and went through the ISO body for formalization. And then the MP3 format came out in 92, late 92 and 93. it wasn't really accepted. And the motivation behind this was to be able to stream over ISDN lines, which were 115 kilobaud lines. And the song that he chose to model his compression algorithm for what we now know as MP3 was Suzanne Vega's Tom's Diner song. Because Suzanne Vega's voice, some aspects of the song, but that was his motivational. That was his test. His test song to tune the MP3 compression algorithm. And in the late, I'd say 1997, 98-ish, MP3s were really starting to come out, and you could get them off of Usenet. And then right around that time, when Napster came out, that's when it all exploded, was when Napster came out, because Napster allowed you to search other people's archives of their MP3s, and you could massively download literally almost every song like you can today with online streaming. Napster did that, and then there was all this turmoil in the music industry about the MP3 format right around 1999, 2000. All right, now, then you could get CD players that would play MP3 CDs. This one won't do that, okay? Your car stereo probably does now. Your CD player and your computer, if you have one, would also play MP3 CDs. And because of the compression algorithm, you can now get 100 songs on a medium. And that was the death of the mix CD. Because 100 songs, you end up like just throwing a lot of songs on there. Now you're back to having a lot of songs that don't really have any tie between them, so to speak. So when the MP3 format came out and Napster occurred, that was the death of the mix tape right around 1998, 99. The whole notion of what a mixtape was gone, because no one was using cassettes at the time. They switched over to whatever. I mean, there's still cassettes out, but that's when it began to die. And then the next thing that came out was when the iPod came out. I think the iPod came out. I wrote down 2001. I think it was actually a little bit later. But iPod was... there were competitors to iPod, but when Apple introduced the iPod and the intertwining between iPod and iTunes, that's when it really changed a lot. All right, so now I know you're going, okay, Boomer, you can just make playlists just like you could with a mixtape. You can. All right, so there's attractive things to streaming services. You know, I know that I'm on Amazon Music, and I got access with my Prime account with 2 million songs. Why would I ever need more than that? You know, iTunes is probably the same way. Probably more songs on iTunes. Just make your mixtapes. Just create a playlist, you boomer. But that's not the same. Well, let's talk about streaming services for just a little bit. Streaming services have two really attractive features. They have the sheer number of songs that are there and the recommendation engines. Now, one of the first recommendation engines that really hold a lot of promise was Pandora. And Pandora was based on this thing called the Music Genome Project, which had a bunch of metadata associated with each song, like, you know, beats per minute, tempo, key, instruments used. And I think they claimed to, like, I don't know, 35 or 40 different pieces of metadata that they could match and put songs together to recommend new songs for you. That had a lot of promise, but it turns out I didn't find it really worked very well. But you had the recommendation engines, and then when Spotify came out, or those type of things that would allow you to create a playlist, people would just throw a bunch of playlists on. So if you look at anything kind of playlist now, a lot of them are the hit songs. And so the recommendation engines that do this thing now ultimately play the exact same songs as clear channel FM stations do. At least on the rock music side, it's very rare. You have to really seek out a playlist that's equivalent to a mixtape. This is the key to the whole thing. I'm going to show you a good example of that. So over here, this is a playlist that I'm working on called Holla Out the Window Nightly, and if you put a Bob Dylan song on a playlist, you are guaranteed that the recommendation engine is going to want to play The Wait by the band, which is the second one down here. Almost every playlist or things I want to listen to, either on Prime, on Spotify, or whatever I was listening to, whatever service it was, the frequency of The Wait from the band is really irritating that it's so prevalent, because the band has several albums, but you're almost always guaranteed The Wait because that's the popular song. So it's interesting now that right now Spotify, no, this is on Google Music, it's on YouTube Music. It's still also recommending The Wait. So I don't think that it's going to really work out that AI does ends up being a saving grace to this whole thing. That's just what I think. However, this is my conclusion here. Mixtapes are not actually dead. They're not. There's one avenue that is still now a mixtape, and it is movie soundtracks. Movie soundtracks, if you start to listen to a movie soundtrack, there are people dedicated to choosing the music that goes on the musical soundtrack, that goes in the background of the scene. And my roommate, another roommate in college, his name was Dan. He lived with me in Atlanta. He also lived, I lived at his place in Boston when I lived in Cambridge. He had lots and lots of CDs. He probably had 500 or so. And, he told me at one point that what he'd really like to do with it, professionally, is be the person that helps the movie industry select tracks to go with the movie. And at the time, I thought that was ridiculous. I mean, who does that? But it turns out, if you start to pay attention to the musical tracks that are on movies, some movies are really tastefully done. An example of this is The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. The soundtrack to that is just awesome. Now, you also have the movies that have hacks that choose the songs. There are a lot of songs about Vietnam War. And the quintessential song they play in those types of movies is All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix. It's almost like The Wait. You're almost guaranteed to set the tone of Vietnam in the 60s. They're going to play Hendrix's All Along the Watchtower. There was thousands of songs in the 60s. For me, it always seems to be that song. So, if you pay attention, I mean, when I go in a restaurant, I know what song is playing over the speakers in a restaurant. I know what music is playing in the grocery store. I just can tune in on what's getting played. It's kind of probably a sickness, but soundtracks are very interesting to listen to, and those are today's mixtapes. And you can buy soundtracks or you can, you could probably just cue them up as a soundtrack and listen to the songs. So what I was doing was I took that original playlist that my nephew created over on Spotify and I moved it over to YouTube Music. I did that for two reasons. Let me bring up that screen over here. Now, my nephew originally named this playlist of songs that I was recommending that I give to my niece. He called it Holla Out the Window. So I followed that theme, and I started adding to that playlist. So this is the first one that I took over from him and moved it to YouTube Music, and now I called it Holla Out the Window Crankly, and that has to deal with well, we'll talk about why it's crankly here in a minute. But that jungle song there by Tosh Sultana, that was my niece's song that she listened to in her car. So that's like the inspirational song for this entire list. And there's Jessica as number 2. And then all these songs are specifically geared to listening with the music down. They're all pretty fast paced. They're all really recorded well. They have a really good drum track. All these songs are awesome. And this playlist is actually down in the description file as well. So this playlist has 48 songs currently, and it's 3 hours and 30 minutes long. So now I'm like, well, that's not even a mixtape. The old coot. No, I think that it is a mixtape. It just lasts for a long time, and you can basically pick a track out of here and start and listen to something when you want to crank up the tunes in your car. You could be anywhere on the list and just continue. Now, the other aspect that I talked about was the order, the segues between the songs, and how that's kind of important. And I tried to adhere to that when I did this, but what ended up happening over the last 3 months since I've been creating this list was I'd add new songs, and the order of which the songs show up is not optimal yet, but this is a work in progress. In fact, if we scroll down to the end of this, I don't even know if you can see this. Let me zoom in on this list here. Yeah, so I think that I ended up, I put Peace of Mind on there off that Boston album I was talking about. Woke Up This Morning from A3. Smooth with Rob Thomas. It's a Santana song. The Cars Give Me Some Slack. This is another song from my niece, What's the Use? And Going Mobile off that Who album. So these ones aren't in their mix at the right spot. So this is a work in progress. This one here. But then I found that there's another playlist that I need to have, and I call this one Holla Out the Window Nightly. And this one is for this one's 3 hours, and this one's almost 4 hours of 57 songs. And this one you play when you're driving after midnight with the windows down on a summer night. Like say you're on a road trip and you want to kind of tone down the music a little bit. You want maybe softer tracks. That's what this one is. This one's, less intensity, kind of peaceful songs. Some of them are a little bit more upbeat, but there's really kind of some peaceful ones. Looks like that one was deleted. I don't know what's going on with that one. All right, let's just get rid of that one. Okay, so this one's definitely not in the right order yet. This one's, because I've been adding to this one all along. Okay, so where are we now? If you want to hear new music, I wouldn't recommend the recommendation engines. I'd recommend that you listen to what your friends that you know that have similar interests, what they're actually listening to. At least it's worked for me in the past because of my affiliation with this group I had in high school. I think that if you know the person or you know that their playlist now is curated by a human, I think those playlists are actually going to be good. But there's also the ones that have all the hit songs as well. So actually, I can't make any recommendations on how to find out new music, really, because I've been relatively unsuccessful at that. But sometimes I hear new things, and I really like them. So a lot of these songs on here are from soundtracks. I guarantee you a lot of these songs are from soundtracks. And I do listen to those ones to kind of pick out some new stuff. So I think that's it for now. Of course, I went long on this, but we're all having fun. It's Saturday night. It's now 9:11 here, Mountain Time. So let me check here. Mason Totten writes, significant amount of my musical taste comes from your mixtapes. Well, there you go. And he misses MP3 sharing. Yeah. I mean, he likes, well, whatever. You can read the comments down there. All right, so I think that's where I'm going to end up tonight. And if you enjoyed this and you want to listen to my human curated playlist to fit your mood when you're driving your car, feel free to stream right off of these playlists. You can pick them up in any track. What I would recommend is you don't turn on shuffle, because there is some attention to the order, and if you turn on shuffle, you're going to disrupt the curated order of the tracks. And particularly on the crankly one, you might get you might get the Cult followed by a Led Zeppelin song, followed by a funk song.
Here's followed by Ravens. Reagan Brown featuring Phil X.
Alexa, stop. I don't know. We'll never know what she picks up over here. All right, so anyway, let's close it up here. And thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, give me a thumbs up. And looks like Mason Totten really enjoyed my rant here, my boomer rant. But I do think that, I look at his life and his age, because he's my nephew. I think that there's a fortunate thing that the people that are in their 20s now have access to millions of songs from the past. If you think about, so when I was in high school, it was in the late 70s, early 80s. So before the 60s were up, then there was the 50s music and the 40s music. We didn't listen to any of that stuff. That stuff's our grandparents' music, kind of. But I think that the people that are in their late teens or 20s now, they have not only the music that they're hearing, but they also have all the historical music that really was rock music that started when the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan's show in 1963. So they have almost 50 years of all the artists that we grew up with, in addition to the artists that they have today. So they even have a bigger problem finding new music. Unfortunately, there are people around like me and other people that loved listening to music that can recommend the Dynamite albums that we know are great. And so I gave you one here, but I can randomly name off probably 20 albums right now. You got Sgt. Pepper, you have Live at Fillmore East by the Allman Brothers Band, Layla and Assorted Love Songs by Derek and the Dominoes. I don't know, I can just go on and on and on, but you don't need to know that. But if you do looking for new music, I think you should, talk to people about what they enjoyed or what they think is really good, because chances are it actually is going to be good. So I'm going to sign off. Thank you all for watching, and we will catch you next time on TikTok with Grandpa. All right, good night.